Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it may be when you give us the pleasure of entertaining what we discussed today. Welcome to the Level Set. I am Attorney Larry Fields. I'm joined by the Dr. Charles Alexander, the Mike Jones, and none other than Jerry L. T. Christmas, attorney at law and human rights advocate. And today we want to get right into a topic amongst many. We know that there is a treasure trove of topics going on in the legacy media today, but we want to hone in specifically for a moment on the 70-year anniversary of the Bandung Conference. And those of you all that don't know what the Bandung Conference was, we plan on teaching you that today. I shouldn't say teaching you that, but sharing that with you today. And with no further ado, Dr. Charles Alexander, give us an overview.
So in 1955, there was an Asian and African conference, and it was held in Bandung, Indonesia, and and it was like 29 different countries. Uh, a significant number of the Asian countries that participated had already obtained their independence, and given that it was in '55. I believe the only African country that was present that was actually a free nation was Liberia. But that being said, there was representation from the countries from the other countries. So, for example, Kwame Nkrumah was present, but Ghana had yet to achieve its independence. But the purpose of it was to discuss independence and to discuss cooperation and to set sights clearly on who the common enemy was. And the common enemy was the European. And because when we're talking about independence and we're talking about freedom from colonization. And so the Bandung Conference was, I think it was the 18th through the 21st of April. And it was, again, it was 70 years ago. And and essentially that's what they meant to do. The black and brown people, there were there, and this was folks from all over the world. There were also people representing, what we refer to as Latin America as well. But all of these people had been subject to a colonial power, and so they talked about working together, doing business together. They talked about not falling victim to any of the previous colonizers, but more specifically, um, they spoke of not getting caught up in the Cold War between the United States and the USSR. And so that became so one of the things that came out of the Bandung conference was the non-alignment movement, which fundamentally just meant that you know these 29 countries, these 29 bodies were going to do all they could do to not find themselves um, aligned or being manipulated and used uh, in the midst of the Cold War. But I think that's one of the immediate things that we could see in the aftermath, because not long after that we saw some of the results of um, various entities actually aligning and kind of the outcomes that came from that. But the really most important thing about the Bandung Conference is that you had, again, these 29 nations. You got all these different people, all these different values, um, and they were able to cast aside their differences in order to spotlight and develop a plan, well, to spotlight the common enemy, which was the European, and to develop a plan um, based upon their ability to coalesce and to support one another.
And Mike Jones, before we get your comments and get to Attorney Christmas, I just want to name the countries that were present: Burma, China, Egypt, Iran, India, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Japan, Jordan, Lebanon, Liberia, Libya, Laos, Nepal, Ceylon, Pakistan, Gold Coast, Thailand, Ghana, Philippines, and Saudi Arabia, which gives you a the insight on what occurred. And I believe around that time it was began to be prophesized that the war that the West was going to have was switching from communism and putting a focus on Muslim countries around that time, or not shortly, not long thereafter. So it's interesting to see the cadre of participants there. But Mike Jones, as you listen to Dr. Alexander and you reflect on the literature that he shared with us this week, what are your thoughts?
Okay, first, let me start by saying I was 6 years old in the first grade when they had the conference, so I was not paying attention to the conference. Okay.
You're right. We understand. It was 70 years. It's 70 years.
Okay. Uh, but in my development, in my adolescent and young adult political development, you become aware not only this conference, but of this concept of, and I think we need uh, to have a bigger historical context. From the 1600s to the middle of the 20th century, Western European countries were collectively were the world hegemon. They, their military and commercial power defined the relationships, and they were exactive colonial exploiters. So colonialism as a worldwide phenomenon is a function of Europeans. Okay, and England was the master of imperialism. They did it better than anybody else. Okay, if if we need a movie metaphor, they were the Don Corleone of the European world, and everybody else was kind of under them, but they all participated as minor families in this organized criminal activity, which was exploiting the rest of the planet. Uh, but World War One and definitely World War Two destroyed the ability of Western Europeans to maintain that world dominance. And there was also an emerging counter ideology. Western imperialism was based on capitalism and Christianity. Okay, and the Christianity justified the capitalism. The capitalism justified reorganizing these parts of the world for European benefit. Uh, there would, for me, there are two incidents in Europe that changes and terrifies Europeans. The first was the French Revolution, not the American Revolution, the French Revolution, because it's the first time everyday people, lower class people, non-noble people, decided you could kill a king and take over a country. And European elite stayed terrified by that thought for 100 years. And then Vladimir Lenin and the Russian Communist Party took over Russia, and in that upheaval also killed the Tsar and redefined the country using a different frame of reference. Now, I'm not making the Russians superior moral human beings. I'm just talking about the political dynamic internally in Europe. So the communism became the existential enemy of capitalism. Uh, that has nothing to do with racism on either part. Okay, I'm just talking about that. So by the end of World War II, uh, and as a side to that, the United States and could not have won World War II without the Russians, because the Eastern Front that the Russians held against the Germans really was the difference in the war, and Russians lost huge amounts of casualties in that. But anyway, coming out of that, the lines between Russia and America broke down now along these capitalist, communist ideological framework. And what was happening then, literally at that moment, is all these, what was called the third world, and as it went on, a world of color, because that's what they all had in common. All the colonized countries were countries that were not white. Okay, there were no white colonies. They were all non-white colonies. And so you had this collapse of the European imperial establishment, that the United States was taking its place to maintain that order, while at the same time, Russia is emerging as the second tier power out of World War II. Took a hell of a beating, but they're also this military power with a kind of revolutionary ideology, and they're reaching out to these other countries across the planet that are emerging into independence. And basically, since they're all underdeveloped countries, the notion of political economic philosophy that speaks to the development of masses of the people radiated. Now, it didn't radiate with everybody, because for religious reasons and stuff like that, but it is. So the United States finds itself in this war of ideas with the Russians in post World War II. At the same time, the world order is collapsing, and so you had this emergence of leaders throughout the world, leaders of color throughout the world, that probably came to adulthood around World War One, right after World War One. So by World War II, they grown ass men, okay, and so they're like Nehru, Nasser, somebody like Kwame Nkrumah, the Pan Africans. So there's this core of political leaders of color throughout the world that have an anti-Western intellectual, political predisposition. Now, that didn't make them all communists or allied with Russia, but it did kind of make them socialists, okay? Because again, they're talking about how you develop countries, how you maintain their independence. And literally after World War II, as all these cards are being reshuffled, you have something like the Bandung Conference emerge, but it's just the biggest of a lot of movements of meetings like that was happening in the 50s. And while the Russians were, or the Soviet Union was interested in precipitating that, the United States was interested in undermining that. So one of the interesting parts of things about this era is that the Soviet Union was aligned with all of the progressive forces in the developing world, or this third world as it became known. And the United States was aligned with all the reactionary forces. So Patrice Lumumba goes to Russia to go to school, and the United States develops Joseph Mobutu. Okay, I mean literally that you can and one is a revolutionary and a patriot, and the other one is a thief and a murderer. Okay, and so the United States has always been
and let's be clear on who bred who.
right. The United States always bred. I mean fundamentally, and I'll give you um, two examples in this era in the 50s. The first is Korea. There was never such a thing called North and South Korea. The 38th parallel, that quote is the border now, was just really a demilitarization line where the United States forces that were in the Japanese defeated the Japanese, everybody pulled below that line. And the United States got the idea that they could consolidate Korea to one country. And fundamentally, they were trying to do that. And the Chinese government under Mao Zedong, so don't cross the Yahoo River. Okay, if don't go past the 38 parallel. If you do, we're going to have a reaction. Well, American white boys being American white boys don't believe fat meat is greasy, so they did. And the Korean War started, and basically the Chinese kicked their ass and ran them back to the South. The other part that would be Vietnam. There's no North or South Vietnam in 1950. The French tried to maintain their imperial presence in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh and their forces basically kicked the French's ass. And in the truce, they had a demarcation line, a demilitarized zone. It was the 17th parallel. Ho Chi Minh's forces retreated to the north. The French retreated to the south. The armistice called for an election in 1956. This was 1954, Battle of Dien Bien Phu, where they destroyed the French. And Eisenhower and Dulles and the American government decided that Ho Chi Minh would win the election. So they didn't want an election. And they canceled the election. That started the Vietnam War. Okay? And the United States hung around for about 15 years, and the Vietnamese kicked the United States ass. And now there's just one Vietnam, because there never was a North and a South Vietnam. That's a figment. Think of it. Donald Trump is a clown and a lunatic, but he's operating under creating the same fictions that the United States has always tried to create post World War II, redefining reality for other people. So while Trump is ignorant and a lunatic, and his stuff makes no literal sense, the United States has always been proactive in that. If you take another situation in the 50s going into the 60s, uh, the Soviet Union supported the ANC. The United States supports the apartheid government. The Soviet Union and the Cubans support the Angola freedom fighters in Mozambique, and the United States supports the Portuguese. Okay, so who are trying to maintain these colonial policies. So all of this stems from this struggle to liberate these countries, and the United States who's trying to be the enforcer to maintain this Western imperialism. And what they had in common, and it became really obvious, well, they were all countries that were non-white. So it really became this idea of people of color starts back then, okay, and this idea of Europeans. No, they ain't just European; they're white folks, okay. So if you start to look at what is the defining element, what's the difference, that becomes uh, that becomes the difference. But during all of this period of time, the United States is proactive, aggressively proactive in trying to undermine all these independent movements. I mean, the United States issues with Iran, or Iran's issues with the United States, start back in this era. 1954, the United States overthrows the elected president of Iran and installs the Shah. Okay, and 20 years later, you end up with Jimmy Carter as president, and the Iranians taking over the embassy. So all of this stuff has history, and in the United States, well, the two things that happened, that the leadership in the 50s, early 60s came from this activist uh, anti-colonial period after World War One. The second generation was not as kind of like second generation of leadership. Okay, you start with revolutionaries engaged in struggle and kind of morph into uh, upper class elite looking to create a new status quo for themselves, and if they can do something for the people, fine. But they'll sacrifice that. So if you take the whole Pan African movement, the biggest boost to that was Gamal Nasser, the president of Egypt. Okay, so the Arab world in North Africa has always considered itself part of Africa. Okay, I mean, to this day, they think they're Africans, and so the United States, and again, Trump is the most absurd, is an absurd example of it. But this need to redefine history, relationships, definitions, so you can construct a world that by default makes Europeans, white people, superior to everybody else. So I think, and also what you'll find in the 50s, in the 60s, particularly in the 60s in the United States, an emerging generation of Black leadership that identifies with this world leadership, this anti-colonial world leadership, because by the 60s, you're starting to have a conversation inside the Black community about we ain't Americans. Matter of fact, I don't know who we are, but we ain't Americans. And and Malcolm is the paradigm of that. He epitomizes that we have more in common with the world than we have in common with that world, that third world, than we have in common with the United States, and that our interests are aligned with them. So Fidel Castro, if you're my age, and anybody from Cuba can kiss my ass, but Fidel Castro will always be a hero to Black people. Okay, because Cuban, because it was colonized by America, was this great. White Cubans had it pretty good. Cuba looks like the United States if you go over there. I mean, they're people of all colors. But when Fidel Castro, he only came to America twice. He came to New York to speak at the United Nations. Could have stayed anywhere. He stayed in Harlem at the Hotel Teresa. Okay. So what I'm saying is they identified with the Black struggle. So you had, until we all went to prep schools and John Burroughs and Harvard and shit, we used to think we was those people too. And what the United States has successfully done is co-opted the better educated, the people with resources, and co-opted them into this matrix, as opposed to that cohort of people staying aligned with where they were. Because basically, all of these people that I'm referencing in the 50s, quote, they were not peasants. Okay, they represented the best and the brightest of their societies in these countries. So one of the takeaways for me in this, it's analogous to our situation, is that leadership was forged out of resistance to oppression. And oppression has the ability to create solidarity out of necessity, and it creates the discipline and analysis. And when you remove the oppression, it gets harder for the groups to stay together, because what they have in common is the enemy. Once you take the overt enemy away, it gets harder to align. So for me, I've taken, and this is Mike Jones's barbershop theory of this, that I think the reason that the Chinese have been so successful and the Vietnamese have been so successful is because their liberation came as a result of armed struggle. They actually defeated somebody, and in that struggle, they redefined themselves. It's what Fanon talks about in Wretched of the Earth. Okay, the cleansing, for lack of a better word, the liberating effect of violence, and Dr. King, I think, understood this. He just knew we didn't have the population or the ability to resist physically, so you resist spiritually. But you misread King if you don't understand his stuff was about resistance too. because it's in the resistance that you get a chance to redefine yourself. It's what Fanon said, that when the oppressed rises up to destroy the oppressor, he destroys two people, the oppressor and the slave. Both die in the struggle, and a new human emerges. So there was a time in the 60s that we connected our struggle to this larger struggle. And then by the 80s, we Negroes again, okay? and we pimping and being pimped, okay? Because capitalism is a hell of a drug, okay? And I would say to use an American colloquialism, for the Mao Zedong, the Fidel Castro's, the Kwame Nkrumah's, the Gamal Nasser, what they would have told America, Europeans, what they would have told white folks, it ain't about the money no more. Okay? And the worst thing a gangster can tell you is, I ain't here for the money. And therein was the difference. But those were unique times they have. And Larry, I think you asked Gerald, I forgot at the start of my rant, this thing I'm on, or before we started taping, had he ever heard this? And Gerald said, no, they don't teach that. And they didn't teach it then. What we had for about 15 years was an alternate culture, and almost like what they did in South Africa, which kind of led for me to the release of Mandela in jail and the end of apartheid. Black children in South Africa had quit going to school and quit speaking Afghanistan. They wouldn't speak the language. They didn't want anything to do. So one of the things we have here for us, we've lost an understanding of the power of culture. We think culture is wearing a dashiki and some beads and celebrating some days and stuff. But culture is your lived experience. And the 60s was really all about redefining that. So fundamentally, what was an amazing phenomenon, you couldn't be in Black student movement and be in the movement and be illiterate. Okay, you couldn't. You had to read Mao. You would have had to read Fanon. Okay, you had to be able to talk about these men, their ideas, how they were relevant to the condition of Black people. So to put in, since we're all kind of basketball junkies here, you had to put in the work. If you didn't put in the work, you couldn't play. And now your lazy, trifling ass can just show up, put on some. It's like going from high school to the NBA.
And announce that you are considering running for the president.
I guess now that's diversity, equity, inclusion. White folks got a clown. We supposed to have a clown.
And and on that note, Gerald, you have a unique experience of being an individual that both worked in the Senate of these United States. You've seen this Machiavellian attitude of this empire, and at the same time, you have advocated for what Jesus would call the least of those, and been engaged in 10, 12, 14-year fights for justice. So as you listen to Dr. Alexander and Mike Jones, and you reflect on this conference, and you see that, in fact, we are the global majority, and you see this in play here, and you know that we're in a situation, as Mike just alluded to, where we have fallen for the trap of representing one corner or street, the 30th Street Bloods and so forth, and we've lost this international identity that we have. What things do you think about?
Larry, first I want to say I just want to thank Dr. Alexander for bringing this up because there's so much out here that we just don't know about that is so important to the journey that we have ahead of us. And we really need this kind of background information in order to embark on that journey. And before he sent that to us this morning, I was unaware of it. So when he said it was the anniversary, then I immediately went to look it up to see, let me find out exactly what this is that he is talking about so I can have a better understanding before I get on the show. And as I'm reading about it, I'm just dumbfounded at the fact that this is not being taught to us. And you think about how much is not being taught to us, and it's just all part of the plan to dumb us down and to keep us from being organized. Mike is absolutely right. You know, our whole battle is in Pan-Africanism and our ability to mobilize African people and unite all across the world. And I really think that it's our duty to push that now and to take on that mantle. But it's just so hard right now because, as Mike said, the thing about that time period in the 50s and 60s, everybody was focused on that and they understood it. And you had conferences that were going on to have discussions about these situations and how we can come together globally, to move our people forward to attack this colonialism. But we don't have these discussions now. And not only are we not having these discussions about how we work internationally, we're not having discussions about how we incorporate this locally to make this work for us. And for me, that is what's so problematic in the time period that we're in right now. And how do we spark that interest in our people to make them want to take on this kind of task that we need to take on? Because ultimately, I think it's going to be us that is going to have to take this on if we're going to ever change the situation and move this. But we also, I think the biggest problem for us is that we will have to separate ourselves from this relationship that we have with America. And like Mike said, capitalism is a very intoxic drug. And that's what the problem is. I don't know if we can separate ourselves at this point because we are so locked into this. And so many people, they don't even want to explore that whole idea of liberation and Pan-Africanism. You talk to so many people. I ran into some of my classmates from high school that do a lot of traveling, a lot of worldwide traveling. And we were talking yesterday, and they were talking about places they wanted to go and things that they want to do. And I brought up Africa because I'd been to Africa twice, and I brought it up. And they've been to all of these places, but they've never been to Africa. And you get that all the time from Black people, and it makes me feel some kind of way in my gut, because they will talk to you about every place else in the world they've been or where they want to go. And then when you mention Africa, that it's like that's the last thing on the list. And a lot of times, often they don't even make it there as a result. So they don't even have the knowledge and the experience to want to bring us together to move us forward through the philosophy of Pan-Africanism.
That's a problem, and we all are sports junkies. And one thing about a trap in basketball, what I want you to do is to look where I want you to look. If I can get you to look in a very, very wound and short place and forget about the rest of the court, I got you. Half of the battle is watching where you're making, controlling your eyes. That's half the battle. Because where your eyes, look is where your George Clinton stated, is where your behind will be. So, Dr. Alexander.
And also along with that, Larry, what's also important in that is the practice. The practice has to be real, like Mike said, the planning, the practice you put in, how hard you practice, how serious you are about it, how focused you are, how serious you take that makes a difference in how you play. And we don't even want to practice.
We don't want to practice. And the other thing is we continue to legitimize this thing we're in. We act as if this is a legitimate thing, but this is, and
And we
Michael,
also act like it's not a problem for us because we are caught up now on independent. In the 50s and 60s, we
it,
were concerned about collective responsibility and moving our people forward collectively as a whole. Right now in 2025, most black people, or a lot of black people, are just only concerned about their own individual success and how they're doing individually, and they feel like if they are doing something or doing well individually, then that's fine. That has nothing to do with them. And as a people, we're not understanding that you may be doing well individually, but it will affect you how the rest of our race is progressing. And if they're not progressing, it will have a drag on you also.
and
And that's important. And the other thing that the last thing that I want to say that he brought up, I thought was very important too, was the courage and the knowledge of the leadership back then. We don't have that courage and knowledge from leadership now. We have more individuals in the Black Caucus right now than we've ever had, but we don't have any discussion from them about Pan-Africanism or what we need to drill down and do right now as Black people. Our representation in Congress right now is more focused on being American and being Democrat. They're giving you all the Democratic taglines right now and all the conversation about the American people. The hell with the American people. They need to be talking to me about what are you going to do for Black people. That's where we need to be at right now. That's where the caucus needs to be at. Not telling me about what the American people are saying or going back and forth with this, where Trump is a fool or Trump is this and that. I want them to be focused on some real policy that's going to move Black people forward and Black people only. We have to be solely focused on ourselves. And the overwhelming majority of them are only in Congress because they came out of a Black district. It's Black people that put them in. So there's no reason why their sole focus shouldn't be on Black people.
Gerald, I'd like to build on that point. I think the essence of our problem is we haven't raised the question of who are we, or we have raised the question and we've answered it terribly. I don't know which, but part
I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah, and part of what made that era work is there was a genuine. You talked about separation. The separation is not physical; it's metaphysical. Okay, it's psychological, it's emotional, and you have to decide as an individual, am I, quote, am I American or am I a descendant of the African diaspora in the United States? Because them two different people. One of the things that happened to Europeans that came to America, the first, when they landed they have their national identity from wherever they came from.
Exactly.
And their kids may have that. But by the third generation, they have integrated into the country and they've lost any connection to their past. I mean, you won't find a third or fourth generation white person whose foreparents were from someplace else in Europe really claim that ancestral homeland. I mean, they might reference it, but they don't claim it.
But you know what's different, Mike? Mike, they get an opportunity to reference and know where they came from. That's what's so difficult for us because we don't get that opportunity.
But here's what has happened to us since 1965. Because before 1965, since 1789, I just don't when the country was formed, we didn't have an option of being integrated. We were always black. We were always something else other than American. So we talked about Chief Justice Taney's opinion on Dred Scott was the only logical conclusion he could draw based on the history and the culture and the law. So he's not crazy. He came to a rational conclusion. Now you can find it morally detestable, but it got some logic to it. Okay, so what has happened for us over the last 50 years or so, because post civil rights, is we got individually integrated in the country. So our otherness as black people, we diminished because just like those other European immigrants, we wanted to be incorporated. The reason Hispanics are so shocked at the ass kicking they taking now is because they actually thought they was like white folks too. Okay, and they were saying, well, I know they talking about them Hispanics. They ain't talking about me. And no, they talking about your ass too. That's why you on a plane down in El Salvador and you're a United States citizen in theory. So all I'm saying is we have been co-opted as well, and we don't have an intellectual or ideological or philosophical frame of reference for reality other than this one. And so until we and historically we've always struggled with it. If you think about great black thinkers, where they were, and my two favorite, I'll say three favorites, would be always be Frederick Douglass. It'll be W.B. Du Bois. It'll be Larry's favorite, Hugh.
Carter G. Woodson.
Carter G. Woodson.
That would be Dr. Carter G. Woodson, I believe.
Right. And what they were all struggling with is who are we and what are we to this place and what is this place to us. So it allowed a Frederick Douglass in the 1870s giving the speech for the Lincoln statue about the Civil War. He had no problem with saying he wasn't our president, he was their president. Okay, what he did was, and as a white, and literally, this is my translation, but literally what he said, for a white guy, he wasn't too bad for us, but he was never for us. He was for them. So the ability, I can't think of who said it, but what is it? The ability to contradict two ideas that are in opposition to each other and still function rationally is a sign of high intelligence. And that's what we've lost. We've lost the intellectual ability to integrate contradiction and function. because there is a contradiction between being in America and who we are. And we can't do nothing about being in America in mass. And we got to figure out how to stay who we are. So that shit's contradictory. And that's
And it's a
what.
constant contradiction that we are constantly in this loop. And we're in this loop right now. And it's detrimental for us right now because we don't have the structure that we need. We don't have the same energy that they had in the 50s and 60s, and the level of intelligence and courage and the will to want to know who you are. Right now, we're dealing with generations that are not concerned about that, and we are steadily losing the generation that has any lived experience of that. I think it's only about 15% of the population
12,
left, 12%
12,
of the
12.
population left
I
that
know.
has any,
I'm in the 12%. Okay.
right.
Well,
But
well,
that's,
let me along that line. Let's bring Dr.
so that
Alexander.
means 82. What is that? Uh,
88%.
88% of us have no lived knowledge or experience of this at all.
So
That's serious.
That,
And where were we gonna be at when we had 100% of that?
you bring up very, very important issues, but I'd like to bring Dr. Alexander back into the fold of the conversation as we deal with this Pan-African beings and us in this, trying to traverse our way through this criminal empire that we call America. You know,
And Larry, we fight it every day. Do you ever think about that? How we have to go in as attorneys and try to abide by this law, these laws and this system and these process and procedures that they give us, and we know it is absolutely BS. But yet we have to carry the load, put on the uniform, and advocate using this BS, and we know it is straight BS.
and the fact that you are still sane enough to say what you just said after
Right.
we've had to be in this foolishness this entire time. When we see the individuals that say they're just calling balls and strikes, and we know they're not calling balls and strikes, when the batter doesn't look like
We
that.
know.
We know that, and but we fight, and we have to continue to fight, and so my point, that I want to bring Dr. Alexander in on is this propaganda that we all deal with as Black folks in the United States. This that leads some of us to believe that we're actually a part of this. I've a guy that I love, and you never, like I said, you never hear this from individuals that aren't doing well. Will say that it's not about race in America anymore; it's about class. Yeah, well, yeah, well, unfortunately, I have a different seat than you do, and the class is based on race as far as they're concerned. I don't care,
It is.
what you have.
And that could be snatched from out under you. And we've seen how quickly you can get knocked down in class in this country if you Black.
That is for sure. Not to borrow Sean Carter, but still N-word is a real thing, as
Right.
as far as he's concerned. But Dr. Alexander, I'm just about the end of Tom Burrell's book, Brainwashed. And in Brainwash, he deals with these Black inferiority issues that we have. And, going from 70 years ago and having a world view to now where you have guys that will go platinum talking about protecting the block that, in that their mother is renting on. What has taken effect on us, and what is the psychological impact that we've had to deal with from mental health standpoint? Because I mean, this is we are a group that, number one, is not recognizing the patterns, but number two, we really are inculcated with putting the interests of this greater society above ours.
So the to the point that Mike made, uh, with regard to that high level of intellectual functioning that's required to balance these two uh, opposing thoughts or ideas. Um, if you don't have that, then you are you are either confused or neurotic or some combination thereof. And so it's a perpetual state of cognitive dissonance. So kind of by definition of the point that Mike was making is that, those folks who aren't able to balance those two things, they kind of live in a perpetual state of cognitive dissonance, and they can't deal with these two facts, and so then they give in to whichever one burdens them the most. And for us, and for most colonized minds, it is to lean toward the aggressor. That feels like the right way to go. That feels like the path of least resistance. And so for us, that has to speak to how unwell we are, because our fundamental identity rests with resistance. So we can't afford to take the path of least resistance, but we don't understand that it's counterintuitive. But that is secondary to 400 years of relating with this person, and and so we do have to look at this thing from the point of view of that, and we have to look at Bandung as within the context of that, and we have to look at now in the context of all of that, in that people were as misguided then as people are now. If that weren't the case, then Bandung wouldn't have been monumental. If that weren't the case, Dr. King wouldn't be monumental. If that weren't the case, Malcolm wouldn't be monumental. I am gonna.
May I ask a question on that point, Doc?
Mhm.
Okay, back then though, they were, was it they were rudderless, or were, 'as opposed to now, it's almost like you see people that are out and out, outright opposing.
Larry, you broke up for me.
Okay, were the people rudderless there in terms of direction? Or were they looking for leaders at that point, or were they in opposition to a strong alternative to the oppressor at that point? Because it seems like we have a very bad combination of that now.
I mean, I don't have I don't have any real reason. Like I've been searching, like I haven't really found um uh what's my brother? It's a contemporary of Frederick Douglass. Uh, Frederick Douglass says, he is glad to be a man, but when
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Martin Delaney,
Martin Delaney, right?
Frederick Douglass said, when I wake up, I thank God that I'm a man, and Frederick, but when Martin Delaney wakes up, he thanks God for being a black man. Right. Now, I haven't read anything anywhere to suggest to me that they were at odds.
Right.
But there is a narrative that suggests that somehow they were. I've yet to find that. Right.
So hold that point. Don't lose that point. to me, uh, Douglas's reference to Delaney is Stokely Carmichael referencing Rap Brown. Okay, you think you had a problem with me? Wait till this brother that's coming behind me shows up. So that's the context I would put Delaney and Douglas in, the same relationship of Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael and Kwame. I, I'm losing Rap's
Kwame
other
Nkrumah.
name now. Now Kwame Nkrumah is Stokely Carmichael. Horace Brown is also somebody else now, but that would be my frame of reference for them. I'm sorry, go on.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's an awesome reference, and he's still being punished today.
Right.
Right. He's a political prisoner today. H. Rap Brown. And so, but I bring that up because this leader thing, and our relative threat by caused by a misleadership class. This dates back to leadership. As long as we've had leadership, and particularly as long as we've had leadership in this space, or at least leadership relative, to the identified enemy, this has always been. We don't process it the same. Like all of us weren't, kidnapped while looking for wood to make a drum. Some of us were just sold by the chieftain of the clan that lived adjacent to us because they were more powerful.
King and Chief had a beef. Now I'm gritting my teeth.
And so this is the nature of our relationship with with these people. Great book to read on that is 2000. I think it's 2000 season. But this is how it looks, and so there's always been this pressure, as long as we've been dealing with these people. Now, we've actually really been dealing with these people, longer than what turned into the transatlantic slave trade. Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, says this fight for Africa starts in, I think he says like 1600 BC, and and the sea people and the constant pressure and wars that ultimately forced us out of Kemet, now Egypt, and back into the interior, and then across to West Africa. And I kind of maintain that it's that whole thing that forces us back into the interior and then to the West that actually makes us prime for this situation that we in now. And when I say prime, I'm speaking to the perpetual legacy of our traumatic response as it relates to relationships with white folks. And so what we're seeing now is really the same thing. The difference between, really the real difference between now and, the 50s and the 60s is that the very thing that many think was a stroke of genius by Dr. King and the rest of the protest leadership was to utilize the television to broadcast the atrocities that were going on in the southern United States. Now, the crazy thing about that is that media is a problem for us. And so it's not that we don't necessarily have thoughtful people. We got the level set. Is that they would rather talk, people would rather talk to the people that they see on TV than talk to us. Right.
And then the people that they see on TV have been compromised. That's why they're on TV.
Great point. And so,
and that's the other major problem, is that you will not make it onto mainstream TV if you have not signed the contract with them.
And
And
so,
well, address where leaders for our community derived from in the first place. Why do we have to have a leader that they recognize in the first place, and where did that begin?
and so I'm gonna take a step back to get to that very point, Larry. And so, when we were in the green room, and then while Mike was kind of laying out how we should be able, how we should understand and contextualize the Bandung conference, I'm gonna suggest to you all that you all were aware of Bandung, but you weren't conscious of Bandung. Everybody on here has read the autobiography of Malcolm X. Everybody on here has heard a message to the grassroots at least once. And it is there that I was introduced to Bandung Conference, because he starts the message to the grassroots with a discussion about Bandung. And his whole point is that if they can do it, if these African nations and these Asian nations and these Latino nations can identify the enemy, put down their difference, put aside their differences, put aside their national differences, and put aside their religious differences and class and educational differences, cultural differences, in order to unite to confront this enemy, then Black folks in the United States should be able to use the same thing. And
Doctors, that it helps them out though tremendously, doesn't it? The fact that they are in their own country, though. When you talk about the Koreans or the Vietnamese or the Russians, everybody that we relate to, they are in their own space. That's the thing that's so unique about us. We are not in our own space.
No, Gerald. I think that can be as big a problem as not being in the space. Because,
really?
but because you may be in the space, but you don't necessarily always have control of the space. Okay, that you got an underdeveloped economy, you got a population with humongous needs, and it takes a while. And to be honest, your space may be too small. I mean, I think one of the things that makes China is the concept, the geography that you're looking at is 3,000 years old. Okay, I mean literally, and they've had, and everybody's got subgroups in them, but they've had a dominant population. The Han Chinese have been it, so they have had total control, and I'm gonna stay with them for just a minute. If you had to say, if you took 2,500 years of world history and asked the name, who has been the dominant power consistently for most of that time? If you had to rank the dominant power, it would be the Chinese. I mean, Columbus got lost looking for China. That's how he discovered America. The Chinese never trying to discover nobody. So I mean, so you and I would I'm looking for the right way to say this. I think you had some extraordinary civilizations in Africa, especially uh, in what historians and anthropologists call the ancient world. Okay, uh, but and that means pre-Middle Ages. But you didn't have any of the scale of China or Rome for an extended period of time. I think you could not imagine what is Western Europe without understanding the space that the Roman Empire took up for 1,000 years. Because literally, damn near every country in Western Europe is a province of the Roman Empire, including Great Britain. And they became the foundation for these nation states. So the smaller you make the footprint with the fewer people who don't have a geographic identity, but have a ethnic identity. But because for me, now this is just my opinion, if you look at social organization, mass social organization, the nation state is the most efficient and the most effective, even more efficient and effective than an empire. Now, nation states turn into empires, but at their core, the driver was the nation state. And that's a large enough mass with enough population who identifies based on geography more than ethnicity or religion. And that becomes the identity that you're going into the world with, dealing with people who see themselves much more fragmented than you. And the countries that have been able to resist and reemerge in the 20th century over the objections of Western Europeans have been countries that have been able to form strong nation states with those internal threats that come with that. So I think religious and cultural ethnic identities, people have been conquering them forever. It takes you got to bring a ass to conquer a nation state.
But but and I would add, I'll say that I think it, and I think that's kind of where you were kind of closing out at, Mike, is that I think it really kind of depends on those broader circumstances. So, like for China, Britain wasn't able to totally, suppress China culturally or politically.
Right.
Right. And so it's also it was that, and the fact, and well, it was that in part because they were at home, in part, and because the population or what have you. But so I do think that dynamic matters, but there are a lot of different factors as Mike is noting, and that's how you see China emerge. But what's important again is that China's part of Bandung Conference, because there was, essentially there was colonialism. But again, so Malcolm's point was that if they could do that, then certainly we shouldn't be separated by class and religious sect and education and da 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 da. We should be able to come together. And in fact, Mike also referenced this when he was speaking, when he's talking about Castro at the Hotel Teresa. Malcolm said, we're going to have our own, he referred to that as our own Bandung. And then Nasser actually came, and also who came was Nikita Khrushchev. They all came to Harlem to meet with Castro at the Hotel Teresa. But again, the thing is that the same levels of confusion exist. It looks different now for a lot of different reasons. One of which is the dominance and the hegemony still exists. The United States, they are world power, so they can do anything to us. We are literally a colony within this thing, and so we just have to be mindful of that power and not minimize that power or its effects. Otherwise, we can't resist. Because again,
So I think, Dr. Xander, we don't actually realize or totally take into consideration our importance as a colony in all of this.
well, we ain't accepted that we're a colony in all.
Right.
Yeah, that's the other.
That's part of the problem.
That's part of the problem.
That's the two things that those
and that's
two
the
polarities
dynamic
that Mike was referring to.
Yeah, and that's but we constantly in this cycle of right now trying to figure that out.
We haven't identified who the enemy is.
Right. And we don't want to. We know who the enemy is. I don't doubt that we just don't want to accept it. We don't want to accept and take on the responsibility.
That's the two polarities. Yeah.
And then addressing it.
Right.
Because we know who the
want to admit that we are
clear,
in
and especially where we are right now, they've made it. They cannot make it any clearer to you who the enemy is and how the attack is directly focused at you. And we still are in this dilemma. We going back and forth, still trying to figure it out, and that's the frustrating part, and it's also the part that gives you energy to fight as a result of the situation that we're in right now. Because when you know better, you have to do better, and you feel the pressure. Don't you feel the pressure that you have to say something? Or, the whole reason I think why we have level set right now is because of the depression that we've been under, and the need that we feel to have to speak out on these issues and educate our people to try to move them in this direction of resistance. This is all about the resistance.
And some you can show them better than you can tell them. Hence,
exactly.
You had a buy-in. Mm-hmm. You go to the Black BP and you buy all the games.
The one thing I want to ask you about from the psychological standpoint, because even when you know all of this from a psychological standpoint, and it may be because of the way that they market it to us, they also take advantage of the whole, like, I can focus and know everything that we're saying here right now and the need for what we need to do. But then I had this other side of me that can really get down on the whole ratchet side too. You know what I'm saying? And that you can be moved by that. And I'm just trying to figure out how we balance all of that, because we get so bombarded with that whole ratchet side also.
Well, Doc, before you give your clinical in response, and I know it's going to be on point. Gerald, I just have to let you know that it's complicated, yo. That's all.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right.
It's complicated, yo.
Right. It's complicated. Right.
That's it, brother. Yeah, but Doc, go ahead. I'm sure you got something.
No, I was going to say it's all a part of the propaganda, and so like even the critiques. If you get a chance and read through that article, you get down to the bottom and they're giving some of the critiques. Those are the same things that impact us. At the end of the day, the Western powers. So you had a global North and you had a global South. And so the global South is essentially those entities that make up the folks who attended Bandung. And then the global north is the United States and all of the white folks, and then the few people of color who aligned with the white folks before the Bandung Conference. And so they still hold most of the cards, even though this thing is weakening and was weakening then. They still hold most of the cards. They still dominate in the ownership of media and media reach and all those kind of things. And so it's very easy for us to be confused because they still hold overwhelmingly all the cards, and they get to dictate perception by and large. And so it really takes a lot, very intentional behavior. It takes resistance all the time to be able to get in that space where you can find that balance that you're speaking of, Attorney Christmas. And so, but that's the nature of the fight, right? And so, but how do we get here, and how does this look? So again, and a message to the grassroots. He starts with Bandung, speaking of Malcolm, and then he starts to talk about Black leadership, and this kind of gets us to now. I'm going to just read a little bit of that. The slave master took time and dressed him well and fed him well and even gave him a little education. Gave him a long coat and a top hat and made all the other slaves look up to him. Then he used time to control them. The same strategy that was used in those days is used today by the same white man. He takes a Negro, a so-called Negro, and make him prominent, build him up, publicize him, make him a celebrity, and then he becomes a spokesperson for Negroes, a Negro leader. That's how we get what we got. It ain't changed. It's the same thing.
It's the same game, baby.
And so it looks different, and and all it really is just more because of the impact of all these, these various forms of media,
And
these
I
various
think
forms in which they can push this in front of us. And so,
right. Kanye was just talking about this last week, wasn't he? Saying that how they manufacturing these kids, these mixed kids. I think he was referring to his own ones, manufacturing to then manipulate Black people.
Now, and I tell you, so politically, that is not that's not a new thought. I mean, that's one of the things that you read John Henrik Clarke and you read some other folks, and that's a thing. All of these explorations into these places where there were people of color, there's probably a mulatto military or political official who sided with the aggressor, the oppressor, the eventual colonizer, which helped to flip the script in any of these places. That's what happened in West Africa. That's what happened in most of these places. And so this ain't, Kanye's crazy, but like any other clock, he write, at least, once a day, maybe twice a day, right? And so,
right.
But he ain't referencing those things, but conceptually, that's kind of, what we've seen occur historically. And so, but we got to know all these things, and we have to know again that we got to be intentional about knowing it, because he's not going to teach us because it's not in his interest.
Right.
He was never going to teach us, which is why it was legal for us to learn to start with.
And where do you think is the best place? Let me ask you this too. Where do you think is the best place for us to interject that teaching? Because you can't do it in the school, and you find difficulty now with even trying to do that teaching in the church.
You gotta do it wherever you can do it.
Right.
Like Jones.
Yeah,
let me add this real quick to this last conversation because people need context for what we're doing. And so this is, yeah, I told you I've been reading Brainwashed by Tom Burrell, Chicago advertising agency owner. But in her legal dissertation, Shades of Brown, The Law of Skin Color, Trina Jones of Duke University examined the historical roots and contemporary significance of prejudicial treatment practiced by individuals of the same race. Distinctions based upon mixed racial heritage became routine early on. Some whites fervently embraced the theory that light skinned blacks were intellectually superior because of the white blood in their veins, Jones wrote. Many mulatto slaves attracted higher prices on the slave market and received coveted indoor assignments on plantations. Some traveled with the slave master, and because of their close association with the slave owner and his family, learned how to read and write. Many hard-working field slaves, not benefiting from the master's favors, regarded light-skinned blacks and house servants suspiciously. If covert meetings were disclosed, if obstinate slaves were punished, decisions was aimed at the suspected snitching, treasonous house slaves. Thus was the beginning of the skin color game that outlasted slavery. So, I
Yeah,
mean, these are real things that we're
But
talking about. They're not,
yeah.
they're,
Mike, do you think you've ever gotten any benefit from being light skinned?
probably,
and you've
okay.
gotten benefits from being.
Nobody's ever walked up to me and said that, but yeah, probably. Uh, 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 Let me make it. I think we're at an important inflection point. I think just literally to that point, it depends on where you're talking about or who you're talking about. Because in Asian countries, your mixed heritage is a liability. Okay, whether it's Japan, whether it's China, whether it's in Asian countries, that ain't no side. Okay, as a matter of fact, you're kind of at part of whatever class or caste system they got. You're gonna find yourself at the bottom of it because of your mixed heritage, and that that fact kind of goes to the point that I wanted to make when we were talking with Charles and you were having that dialogue, that a lot of what goes on with you now is a function of who you were before white folks entered the picture. Here's what I mean. Japan was Japan before white folks ever got to Asia. China was China before white folks ever got to Asia. Vietnam, Korea, all of those places existed independent of white folks, independent of Europeans before a European ever set foot on it. So if you were to ask any of them people from 1500, 2000, who they were, they would have told you, and they would not have had a frame of reference to Europeans. You go to Africa, including North Africa and the Middle East, that the political geography of those places, those nation state boundaries, are not the organic, natural boundaries of those people. So the people collected in those boundaries may have had nothing to do with each other for most of their existence. They are how white people organize the continent of Africa, and those countries are a figment of white people's imagination. So we're talking about how you organize people who didn't choose to even be together. Now that's something writ large, but that's us. We didn't choose America. America chose us. We got all dumped in here, and now we got to figure this shit out. Okay, and some days we do it real well. Some days we obviously don't. But the formation of an identity for a people or a culture happens over over millennia. It don't happen, man. 200, 400 years, 250 years is a blink in the scheme of things relative to human development. So won't nobody know we was even here 1,000 years from now. Okay, so I don't know how long it took for China to become China or Japan to become. So where they would say that everybody on this island that's Japan or in this place we call China, whether they're the emperor or the peasant, they're Chinese. And I don't know who they are. I know they ain't Chinese. We didn't get chance. If you just take the continent of Africa, because one of the things that strikes me that you will never hear people whose ancestry or who came from the continent of Africa ever refer to themselves as African. They'll refer to themselves by their tribal or their national identity.
Exactly.
So Africa, the idea, as a matter of fact, if you go to Europe, Europeans don't refer to themselves as Europeans. They're French, they're Spanish,
Right.
they're German.
Right.
Okay, so what I'm saying is the nation state identity is still the most dominant identity, and it's a function of geography and what developed inside of that organic. So people can tell you when France was formed. That Italy didn't get to be a country till the 1890s, but the peninsula of Italy always functioned. They had a lot of little kingdoms, and Milan was a place, Florence was a place, but literally all of that happened inside of this defined geography that made it easy for them to become Italian because they all spoke the same language. They had a common history. I don't know how long that takes, but I know that the countries we're calling the place we're calling Africa have only been, they didn't define themselves, and they've only been free, independent, have the independent ability to define themselves even inside of their geography over the last 70 years.
And those country names by and large,
yeah, we're given to them.
Yeah, they're given to them just like they can have X's just like the Nation of Islam gave,
right,
because
right.
that's for what those countries, and so in those country names obscure all of the different ethnic identities,
right,
which then for us confuses us about how we look at it, because we keep saying, well, we used to all be together. We didn't relate to each other as Black folks. We related to each other as Black as people, because there wasn't no white folks. So it wasn't remarkable to be Black.
Right.
It's who we were. We just related to each other as each other. And then this funny looking cat comes, and stuff starts to get tricky.
And here, wait a minute. And Charles, here's the difference. When they showed up in Africa, Africa was not politically and economically organized in a way that it could push back as a place. When they showed up in China and Japan had something for their ass. Now, you could dismantle that. The continent of Africa was not politically organized at that level.
And that too was the difference in that it was a continent versus what we accept now as those places being countries, kind of the stuff like, and so so you just so right, the organ, it was not situated as a whole.
As a whole, right.
That just, and many of us think that there was this time when that fell apart, and then we became blah 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 blah. But it really didn't happen that way. It you know, there's certainly some times in which that did happen, but that's not really the
And I'm
genesis of
saying
this
that's what I
problem.
call
And then we don't even really envision Africa as a continent like that. A lot of times
No,
when
we don't.
they don't, it's a whole continent. It's, they're looking at it like it's just like one country or one nation as opposed to a whole continent. Just like uh, this whole continent, North America, is not, it's split between United States and Canada, the whole continent. We're not just one whole continent, but they don't have an understanding of that.
despite what Trump thinks. Okay.
Mhm.
And so, yeah,
But
and so,
Trump is just trying to get more white people in the country because he knows that it's the numbers game, like you mentioned before in earlier episodes, Mike. He's trying to find ways to get more white people in the country.
and again, like these are all things that we've always known, but so much of the stuff we
We
don't
don't
use
think
it.
about it, Charles.
Yeah,
That's the difference.
that's what I was about to say. We don't use it for anything meaningful other than fodder during conversations. Oh, he just want more white folks. Well, yeah, that's exactly what he wants. and then it'd be on to the next one. Yeah. Oh, they just want to take it back like it used to be. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. And then, how about them Cardinals, right? And
Right.
so
Because we're not strategizing on
we're,
how we can lock down and
we're
make
not strategizing. And
right.
that is the point. But
Mhm.
again, part of that, again, this is not happenstance. We ain't just trifling. This is the constant downward pressure.
Wait a minute. But Charles, what you really describe it is we got a lot of data and almost no information.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We got loads of data, but we ain't got no information. So, and our problem is, or our issue, I won't call it a problem, our issue is we don't know how to take the data and turn it into information. Because all information is data with context. So that
We're still having trouble
organize.
sourcing.
Huh?
Because we're still having trouble sourcing.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Well, you know what? It's not sources. Because I'm not a
what
scholar.
I mean is that if he don't say it, we have an implicit doubt about the legitimacy of the information. If he don't say it, so if I say it, I don't know if Doc know what he's talking about.
Right, exactly.
But if that white dude I went to school with say it, then it's kind of right.
That wanted your outline.
Yes.
The reason I'm not going to buy that, because my predisposition is if he's talking, he lying. Okay, now that's my premise of going into, just like I think everybody cheats. Okay, okay. Now, I might not be able to figure out how he cheats. I might not be able to figure out, but I have no reason to. I have no basis.
Mike, you're rare.
Why?
So they don't make them like you anymore, Mike. These guys that we are dealing with on a daily basis believe that this structure is legitimate. Just as slavery was legal, they would execute it today because they think that entity that created that is legit, and it's not. And that's the problem. You have to have education beyond the lines in order to come to the conclusions that you did. You have to know what they're saying, then you have to have another body of information that suggests that what they're saying is not true. And these individuals that we are competing with or against that have waged war on us only have one set of information, and the individuals that are supposed to be on our side only have one set of information, and it comes from them.
And okay, so we said we have war. And so misinformation and disinformation, that's espionage. This is part of the war. This is it. This is it. but we'll say stuff. I mean, I just don't understand. Like we'll say, well, they ain't teaching us. What
They never taught it.
they never taught us.
They never taught us.
And so and so that can't be we can't keep. I mean, I guess you got to start there, but you can't keep going back.
Right.
And so so
Well, no.
so at
Wait a
some
minute.
point you do have to become conscious, and so in
Charles-
your consciousness you say
Charles,
you're going to teach us, but you can't
what
stay
you
there.
start
Yes, sir.
with is they've never taught us, they won't teach us. So that means, by definition, I did have to do something else. I mean, if you take that as the predicate, a rational person proceeds to make a plan based on that predicate. So,
Except for, and that's where the thing gets tricky, Mike, because that's what trauma does. Trauma makes the rational irrational. That's how you know you're traumatized. And so
That's when the lie becomes the truth.
that's when the lie becomes the truth. And that's why it's like we ain't just randomly trifling. This is what it looks like. These are the implications for a significant number of our people. And this is the nature of the fight.
And Charles, I think this is where this is why it will always be the dichotomy between Malcolm and Martin. Martin was trying to reconcile the contradiction of us in America. Malcolm, categorical imperative, his a priori position was, I have rejected America. So I'm on a journey to find something else. So the real question everybody Black ought to ask everybody Black is, who are you, man? Don't tell me. Tell me who you are. Because what you'll never hear me say is we or us, and that means me and America. America will always be them. Okay? It ain't gonna never be me. Okay? So I accept it, and I've been working on this piece but I accept the part that I am a stranger in a strange land. I've said that before. This is where I'm at. I speak the language. I understand the culture. But I am never part of this place. I am an observer. And so for me, whatever happens here can happen to me just because I'm in the same geographic space. But it does not cognitively, it does not emotionally resonate with me like, oh Lord, what we gonna do about it? Classic example. I'm just trying to quit being lazy and go back to writing again. But I would say to you that Donald Trump is not our problem. Our problem is the consequences of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is a white people's problem. Donald Trump is the president of the United States because white people voted for him. The majority of Black people voted for Harris. The majority of Hispanic people voted for Harris. The majority of Asians voted for Harris. The majority of white people who were Jewish voted for Harris in the same numbers that Black people voted for Harris. So Trump is the president because white people voted for him. So I don't have to go to the rally and people say, oh, what we going to do? I'm not going to do shit, okay? When you fix it, yeah, now, I think I told you guys what I will be is if white folks start to fix it, I'll be Lee Smith or Rivera in the bullpen. And if you get to the 8th inning and need somebody to close it out, you can call me then, and I'll come in and close for you because I want to beat him too. But I'm not starting the game. Okay, this is your fucking problem. Okay, until your ass gets up and does something about it, don't call me. And I'll suffer like we have been suffering because nothing about your democracy has ever advanced my agenda. And when you make that call to the bullpen for you, I'm gonna tell you I need a new contract, else I ain't coming.
Tear this one
Exactly.
down.
Now
Tear
that's
the
what I was. That's
framework
what I'm glad you said
down.
that part.
Tear it down. But 2 points, Pastor Mike Mays. He's a peculiar person in this land, and he's of this. He is in this place, but he's not of it. What a sermon for resurrection, sir, resurrection weekend. Thank you, Pastor Mike. Go ahead, Gerald, and we're going to close out on some action points, and we're going to move on and do what we have to do. But go right ahead, Gerald. Give me the things that we need to do as succinctly as you can to fight this war this week.
We got to take action. We have to be engaged, and we have to be advancing our issues and our issues only. We have a habit of getting caught up in everybody else's issues. As Mike said, don't call me. Don't call me. This is your problem. We have to drill down and focus on our problems that we're having. And we have got to put Black first over everything. You know, the deportations that are going on to Venezuela and other places, that's not our issue. That's not our issue right now. We got to be concerned about the people that we have right here, right now in our own communities and what's happening with them. Politics is all local. So let's focus and drill down on what's happening with our people, Black people, Black people. What's happening with our Black people locally, and what can we do to change that situation?
Gerald, the only thing I want to do is I want to define Black people because I have worked that through. I'm talking about when I say Black people, when I say us, I'm talking about the descendants of the people we're descendants of the African diaspora of people who were brought, Africans who were brought from Africa to the United States and who were enslaved or was threatened with slavery. So if you're an immigrant from a country of color who comes to America, I define you necessarily as the same as me. Because my circumstances for getting here and my ancestors, my forebears, are different than the choice your parents might have made and you might have made to choose to come here. So all of us are here involuntarily. So we need to be more specific when we start talking about us. Because we have to be too damn inclusive. You know, we say, well, everybody. And we got to get people to understand that if you are a descendant of the African diaspora in the United States, you're not the same as every other person of color, and every other person of color ain't you, and you damn sure ain't the same as the Europeans. So your American experience is a different American experience, and you are entitled to that perspective and to understand the world and that. So this ain't about convincing other people about my correctness. I don't care if I'll explain it to you so you can understand, but I don't need your approval. And whatever you think about it will not change how I think about it. Because I am the captain, I am the master, what is it? The captain, the master of my fate,
Captain
the
of my
captain
ship,
of my soul.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
right.
And I think, Mike, you absolutely right about that. You are absolutely right. We have to get more specific because we are not specific enough. And you right on point with that. We have to be specific, and we cannot I absolutely hate that people of color. Because when we get lumped in with that whole people of color, we get lost and we get pushed to the back. And we so quick to adopt that, especially when Larry talked about in mass media and what's presented to us, we so quick to adopt all of that black people in mass media. And we have to be specific. You absolutely correct.
We get pushed to the back after all the bullets have been fired, but while the bullets are
Exactly.
being fired,
All the way to the back. All the way to
we're
the
in the
back.
front while the bullets are being leveled.
And that's
Doc,
why we have to prioritize ourselves. We have to make ourselves, and we have to not, and see, we feel guilty about that, and we can't feel guilty about it. We
that's be-
we have got to prioritize ourselves, and it's not about uh oppressing anybody else. It's about focusing on uplifting ourselves.
that's the trauma. We have been so traumatized, and we've been made to feel so inferior. We are ashamed to put our own agenda out front without encapsulating someone else.
And that's Larry, that's exactly what's happening at the national level now with our leadership and at the local level, which is why, here in St. Louis, uh, why we have done so poorly as we have with Black leadership here in the city of St. Louis, because it has really failed to put the agenda forward for the Black people.
Absolutely. Dr. Alexander, could you give us some points to work on this week?
Uh, if you haven't read A Message to the Grassroots, read it. And hopefully there's something in there that inspires you to do some more study so that you can have a little better context for what we're going through right now. Um, that's what I would suggest, and I would like to just leave you with one last quote from Malcolm. I would like to just mention just one other thing else quickly, and that is the method that the white man uses, how the white man uses these big guns for Negro leaders against the Black Revolution. They are not part of the Negro Revolution. They are used against the Negro Revolution.
Amen. I would
Pull
just
some examples of that right now, Dr. Alexander.
Everybody.
The CBC, CBC, Al Sharpton, all of these guys. Like this is most of the folks you see on TV with any regularity, they're not representing the needs of the people. They are bought and sold, and so that's what we got to know. But again, that's a part that's espionage in action. That's the propaganda. And
Wait a minute,
so,
and Charles, to that point, and Gerald, and this is for your consideration. We have to become better hustlers. And see, a hustler is always playing somebody. Because if you're a hustler, either you playing somebody or somebody's playing you.
Playing you.
And that's the way you go into it. So you should want to see different people on television. If them the folks you got lying to us, you keep them, okay? Because I want you to believe that I believe them, okay? So I can go about my business and do something else. And so and here's what you do in any kind. You flip them, okay? If you're gambling and once you know how somebody cheats, you don't call them out. If you're a professional too, you say, now that I know what you're doing, I'm gonna play you now, because I'm gonna let you think you're cheating me till I get ready to flip you. So we used to know how to hustle, but we spent too much time being middle class and aspirational and all that kind of bullshit, and we've left the streets behind. So one of my favorite scenes in all film is the scene in The Wire between Stringer and Avon, when Stringer and they're talking about the business And Springer said we could make money this way, this way. And Avon looks at him and hears everything he says. And Avon said, I get all of that, but I'm just a gangster, I suppose, and I want my corners. So fundamentally, you cannot leave that part of who you are out. Because if you do, like he told Stringer about Clay Clay Johnson, he said they saw you coming, man. You in that game, and the first thing anybody will teach you about the street, you don't ever hustle in a game you don't control, because you get played every time. You define your hustle. You say, I play this way, I don't do that. So you can make money doing that. I say, I don't do that. Because really, I don't know how you cheat until I can figure out, because I'm going to cheat you. So until I can figure out how to do that better than you do it, then I'm going to leave that alone. So let them be on TV. Let them be say, man, wait a minute. I hope you think black folks think Stephen A. Smith got enough sense to lead us anywhere. Okay? He's entertaining. We're not as dumb as you. That's how Trump gets to be the president. But I want you to think that I'm that stupid.
But here's the scary thing about that, Mike. You got black folks cheering for the court jester in the Ukraine.
But all I'm saying is, if you're asking the four of us and anybody listening, I'll be like the old brother in the barbershop, or your grandfather saying, well, what about everybody else? And I got to tell you, son, fuck everybody else. I'm telling you what you got to do to be okay.
Right. That is
I can't fix everybody else. You asked me a question about how you should play this hand. I'm telling you, this is the way I would play it. And I'm saying this is the way I think you to play, for you to be okay. Now.
And that's where it got to start.
And that's where it's got to start.
That's it.
You got to first be okay.
The only thing I would add is, number one, understand that you are
in a war.
Understand that. Number two, understand that in this war, no one is playing fair against you.
It's a war.
So the system that you're dealing with is not just, and you do not have to strictly adhere to those rules that they're playing to. Number three, in addition to the book that Dr. Alexander suggested that we all revisit, I think we all need to take a serious look at reading Brainwashed, because I think the level of writing that he did will allow us to spend our, we can go from middle school all the way up with that book, because it's not dense and it's very, very plain. And Tom Burrell does an extraordinary job of covering all the topics that we talked about today. It's called Brainwash. So, and I love you, brothers. I appreciate you all. And, let's continue to fight the fight.